and good morning, everyone. Welcome to this edition of our Brunch and Learn webinar series. We're thrilled to have you tuning in with us today and hope that you're all well. I'm Sofia Vereshkina, the Communications and Social Media Coordinator at the Climate Reality Project Canada. I'm joined today by my colleague Matthew Chapman, Community Climate Hub Project Manager, and our speakers of the hour, Patrick Rondeau, Union Advisor at the Fédératon des travailleurs et travailleuses du Québec, and Saeed Kaddoura, analyst on the Clean Economy team at the Pembina Institute. This Brunch and Learn series is an opportunity for us to explore the topics covered in the National Climate League standings. The 2019 standings feature 15 primary sustainability indicators benchmarking climate action among participating cities across Canada. It also features examples of best practices in those areas. We invite you to download the standings at ncl.climatehub.ca and to explore our webinar series at hubflix.climatehub.ca. For today's feature, we are looking forward to discussing sustainable employment, how to adequately define it and quantify it, and the benefits a just transition can bring about in the workplace. Additionally, we will be presenting you with an overview of one of Pembina Institute's recent reports called Alberta's Emerging Economy, a blueprint for job creation through 2030, which examines employment potential in Alberta and provides a blueprint for job creation as the province's economy evolves. Today, we have the pleasure of being joined by Patrick Rondeau, Union Advisor at the Fédératon des travailleurs et travailleuses du Québec, and Saeed Kaddoura, Analyst on the Clean Economy team at the Pembina Institute. We will first hear a presentation by Patrick and followed by a presentation by Saeed. So Patrick Rondeau has been an Environment and Just Transition Union Advisor for the Quebec Federation of Labour since 2019. He was an FDQ Regional Advisor for the Greater Metropolitan Region from 2012 to 2019. He was also in charge of mobilization and coordinated several national campaigns for the FDQ, including Minimum 15. He has been a member of the coordinating committee of the Front commun pour la transition énergétique since 2016. Since 2015, he has also coordinated various FDQ and Fonds Solidarité FDQ delegations to the UN conferences of the parties. Patrick finally participated in different negotiation tables and working committees during these COPs on the subject of a just transition. So before we start off, I'll quickly remind everyone that you can post questions at any time using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We will visit some of these during the Q&A period following Mr. Rondeau and Mr. Kaddoura's presentations. And I also want to mention that a recording of this webinar will be made available on our YouTube channel and on our HubFlix in the days following the webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today, Patrick and Saeed. Patrick, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sophia, and thank you very much to all the team of Climate Reality Project Canada for the invitation. It's an honor to do this webinar on sustainable jobs. When you look at the National Climate League standing, you realize that the sustainable jobs categories the poor child in the ranking. Why is that? In fact, what is sustainable employment? We can ask ourselves the question. These jobs are often associated with the sectors in which they operate, and this is quite normal. Let me explain. What images comes to your mind when you think about sustainable jobs? Wind turbines, solar panels, and there is a trap in all that, because we contrast, albeit unwittingly, sustainable jobs with those that we would consider unsustainable. Clearly, we give the impression that there are good jobs and there are bad jobs. At least that is the perceptions that workers in these sectors receive. This demonization of these jobs is one of the reasons why thousands of workers resist change. In the absence of tangible solutions within their reach, there can only be resistance that takes hold. Yet, the job world would simply not go from unsustainable to sustainable. If we take the case of Alberta, which my comrades will present after me, we can see that the way of the economic crisis is not the way out of the economic crisis is not that simple. It is doubly fueled, one by the oil price crisis and then by COVID. This is an interesting example. Although we agreed that we must stop producing and using fossil fuels, the fact remains that their use is still present and is intimately linked to the economy of the country. You know, despite COVID, the oil consumption rate has only dropped by 20%. We are therefore faced with a thorny choice. Should we close everything knowing that our economic system is intimately linked to the consumption of this energy and continue production business as usual for lack of immediate solutions? Or should we consider using new technologies immediately to begin to reduce production while maintaining it for the necessary years? Of course, the term necessary is open to debate. We can shoot out in response the growth or down with cash. Posture is important. Too often we call for drastic and radical changes with no visible result, and demobilization takes place. I saw that a couple of times doing the mobilization for FTQ. We are therefore wasting precious time. Otherwise, it is the theory of small steps, which assure us of changes, but perhaps not fast enough to respond to the climate crisis. The answer is therefore clearly in between, and that's where the union movement is standing. In the inevitable energy transition already underway, jobs will be transformed, others lost, and some created. In the case of those who will be transformed, the mobilization of workers towards solution is essential. Some current industrial sectors emitting a high rate of GHGs will continue to exist, but will have to significantly reduce their emissions. We must, we just have to think of steel, for example. Failing that, if the steel works, let's just start closing their doors. We will import steel from the outside and will always contribute in a certain way to the increase in global warming by putting even the burden on the countries of the South, because we have no tariff barriers for carbon in Canada. It is therefore important that industry quickly makes a shift and involve workers as experts in decarbonization plans, that joint committees be set up, and that state funding be conditional on the development of these so-called joint plans. Otherwise, the workers will turn up and start labor strikes, since the feeling they will have is that everyone has let them down. We only have to look at the situation in the coal industry in Alberta, where the lack of an inclusive plan between 2017 and 2018 for this sector has plunged communities into unprecedented social and economic crisis. Is this the transition that we want? Punish workers and just save the sectors? Of course not. But for that, we must stop demonizing these jobs and restore their full value by involving the workers at the heart of change. That's what we call a just transition. So far from the images we give to sustainable jobs, it is quite possible that jobs that we consider problematic in certain sectors may become sustainable jobs in the future. Take the example of Germany, which has converted its cement industry, or Great Britain, which has drawn up ambitious and detailed decarbonization plans for all its industrial sectors. In addition, COVID has taught us one thing, that industries have a capacity of resilience. Think of the aeronautics and armaments industries that have reconverted their operations in record time to produce artificial respirators. But there will be job losses, that's for sure. In these specific cases, support programs will have to be put in place to support workers in their communities. Many regions are still dependent on a single industry, and the situation of monoeconomic dependence has shown us, unfortunately too often, that a closure can plunge a community to terrible crisis. And then new jobs will be created, but which ones? How do we make sure they are sustainable? First, we need to have a clear diagnosis of the situation. If we do not stupidly create jobs without worrying about climate change, we condemn ourselves to the same cycle that pushed us in this climate crisis first of all. Finance alone cannot dictate the choices to be made. The development of new jobs must become a societal debate to ensure that we reach the GHG reduction targets, that access to the jobs will be fair, and that we can address the issue of social inequality. This will require a real consultation of socioeconomic actors, both challenges on an economic, environmental, and health basis. COVID has also shown us how much our societies need to strengthen their resilience. We will have titanic effort to make to reduce our dependence on gasoline, since the economy of Canada is closely linked to this sector, and that simply transforming our car fleet into electric vehicles will not just work. But to succeed in reducing use of the solo car, the public transport offer must be significantly improved, which will not be easy in the post-COVID period, since people will be afraid to take public transport. In Montreal, a recent study showed that 1 in 4 people no longer intend to take public transit, while the city continues its effort to stop the car. The current lack of coordination causes urban sprawl even more, since people, having discovered telework and being caught in the transport complication, leave the city. So we have an opportunity at renewable jobs, sustainable jobs in transportation, but there's quite challenges. In constructions, thousands of workers depends on the contracts awarded in their regions. This is why we see this rapid support for various pipelines projects. Yet they are not pipelines they want, but jobs. A vast eco-energy renovation project for public institutions like universities, hospitals, and so on will allow a transition to qualify as sustainable jobs. The same goes for green infrastructure that truly meets the needs of communities. In closing, we have an extraordinary opportunity right now for a fairer and greener recovery. The Quebec Federation of Labor is proud to be associated with initiatives such as something called the G15 in Quebec, and is proud to participate in the principle for just recovery with the Climate Action Network. We know that the economy is the cornerstone of the fight against climate change. We know that if you want decarbonized sectors and best practices, it means jobs and sustainable sectors. We must therefore rethink our political and economic levers. For example, revising the law on public procurement, which manages the supply of cities in goods and services, will allow us to ensure a more social, more circular, more resilient economy, and allow us to achieve our GHG reduction objective. We also need to rethink our relationship with energy. It is clear that the more we consume, the more we will produce. And as long as the price of fossil energy is more favorable than renewable energies, we will continue to produce more fossil energy. This is why investors have a crucial role to play and will need to be bold and ambitious to reverse this trend. More than ever, we must articulate solutions around resilience, a responsible economy, and social dialogue, including all stakeholders without exceptions. This is a real social project. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Patrick. We'll now hear from Saeed Kaddoura of the Pembina Institute, author of Alberta's Emerging Economy, a Blueprint for Job Creation Through 2030, which examines employment potential in Alberta and provides a blueprint for job creation as the province's economy evolves. Saeed Kaddoura is an analyst on the Clean Economy team at the Pembina Institute. His diverse knowledge and experiences create the foundation for his transdisciplinary research approach. Saeed works on different facets of the clean energy transition, including green jobs modeling, just transition, corporate renewables procurement, and depolarizing conversations around climate change. He has experience in innovative renewable energy and energy efficiency financing mechanisms. In 2018, he was named as one of Corporate Knights' top 30 under 30 leaders in sustainability. Saeed, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and nice presentation, Patrick. A lot of good insights in there. I'm just gonna share my screen. Do you guys see my slides?
Yes, we do.
Sounds great. So today, thanks for the intro, Sophia. Today I'm going to be talking about a report that we released last week called Alberta's Emerging Economy that tries to estimate the number of green jobs that we can create in Alberta by 2030 over the next decade. If you see me reading from my notes, it's just because I have a lot to say, so I just want to make sure I don't miss anything. For those of you not familiar with the Pembina Institute, we're a national non-profit clean energy think tank, and we work on several areas of essentially the energy transition, including decarbonizing electricity, transportation, and buildings, the shifting world of fossil fuels, and how to create a more competitive economy. In our report, we looked specifically at 4 key areas of Alberta's economy and found that we can create around 67,000 jobs in the province over the next decade. And that represents almost 67% of the total workforce of mining and oil and gas extraction in 2019. And we really looked at what is available and possible in the current policy environment. So we didn't consider developing technologies such as kind of carbon capture and storage and hydrogen that are not necessarily commercially feasible. Under a current environment, these jobs are possible to come online. And we specifically look at what we call full-time equivalents, or FTEs. So in this case, that means how many full-time employees are you able to hire? The other side of the job metrics, sometimes you hear them referred to as job years, and that represents a total workforce. So to just kind of give a comparison between the two, sometimes you hear consulting companies say we have 30 employees or we have 300 years of combined experience. Essentially, the employees is the FTEs and the combined experience is job years, which is usually used more for temporary projects such as construction projects. Looking at the renewable electricity sector, Alberta's electricity sector has been transitioning from one that's been dominated by coal-fired generation to one that's more decentralized and diverse in terms of fuel source, with a significant growth in renewable energy because of the dropping prices and the availability of the resource. The big opportunity here that we see is in solar and in wind. And what I really want to also mention is you see on the right, there's a table of what we call job factors, and these are available in the appendices of the report. When it comes to measuring the local impact of a specific policy, these job factors allow you to compare the job creation of a specific project or policy. So for example, if you take a look at the right under solar residential, if you know you have a solar residential program that's going to bring 10 megawatts online of renewable electricity, that in a way will create 200 construction jobs and 10 operation and maintenance jobs. So these are metrics that allow comparability between projects. Specifically under renewable electricity, we looked at 2 scenarios. The alternate renewable policy scenario considered the lowest cost generation available, so that's the wind power generation at this point. We also looked at diversification scenarios, which assumes a significant drop in the cost structure of solar power and higher penetration of energy storage, which we do anticipate coming in the next few years. And the number in the parentheses refers to the presence of policy certainty. Essentially, if companies know that a government or a municipality has let's say a renewable electricity program and they're going to be investing in solar, it really sends a positive signal to them to say, you know what, this is a market that we want to invest in or have projects in, and it's going to contribute to job creation as well. The next category we looked at is jobs potential in transit and EV infrastructure. And there's one thing I'm going to mention here about infrastructure. There's really 2 ways to grow an economy. You either increase employment or you increase productivity. And infrastructure actually is the thing that does both. And that's why looking at infrastructure during recession times, such as COVID, would be important to really grow the economy in a way that improves both productivity and employment. So looking at how can we build transit lines, building LRTs, hospitals, even responsibly developed pipelines are an example of an infrastructure project that could create jobs and at the same time improve our productivity. When we're looking at transit infrastructure specifically, investing in low carbon transportation options not only reduces greenhouse gases, but it also improves the mobility and accessibility to jobs. So by building transit, you are reducing your emissions from transit, obviously, but you're also connecting communities to job opportunities within major city centers. In 2016, the government of Alberta invested $1.4 million into 6 rural transit projects, which connected rural Alberta to major city centers like Edmonton, Calgary, and Medicine Hat. And that gave around 40,000 Albertans that didn't have access to transit new opportunities and job opportunities in essentially access in a larger region. Next up, we looked at energy efficiency in buildings and industry. Here we've got a dilemma because over the next 10 years in Alberta, our building stock is going to increase by around 25%, which will bring with it an increased energy demand. But at the same time, we do need to decrease our energy demand from that building stock. So energy efficiency is really the key for us to do that. One thing to note is really the contribution of industrial processes. In Alberta, the industrial sector represents around 80% of the available heating efficiency reduction and 30% of the available electrical efficiency reduction. So there's a big opportunity there. And one of the reasons also that the industrial processes are a big contributor to jobs is because improving industrial efficiency is actually a very complex process that requires a lot of energy monitoring and verification. Every industrial process is different and is context dependent, and projects usually have varying project schedules and production schedules that you need to meet. So that complexity really contributes to that job creation as well. And the last category that we looked at is green jobs in the oil and gas industry. And that had 2 parts of it: environmental cleanup and methane reduction. Under environmental cleanup, the first thing we looked at is the cleanup of inactive wells. Right now, there is a weakness in the regulation that allows producers to leave their wells pretty much sitting suspended indefinitely without completing the final steps of remediation and reclamation. And this is one of the reasons that we have a backlog of 94,000 inactive wells, the majority of which have been actually in that state for over 5 years now. We also looked at the job creation from creating oil sands and coal mine reclamation. There's around 200,000 acres of open pit that could be reclaimed using the same skills and equipment that are already existing. So we're able to do that without having to go through retraining programs, for example, and without job losses from these specific activities. And then the second prong under the oil and gas industry is looking at methane jobs. And I always say don't underestimate methane management because it's the lowest cost method of lowering greenhouse gas emissions in the oil and gas sector. Not only does it reduce the GHG impact of the methane itself, but it also saves companies the loss from leaks of this valuable product that they sell. So it actually is a competitiveness play for them as well. And while the number under methane jobs does look relatively small, these are actually very highly specialized jobs. So when it comes to methane, there's going to be jobs in things like leak detection and repair, creating operating systems and alert programs and cybersecurity, technology pilot projects, policy development. So these are actually very highly scaled, highly paid jobs, and they're going to be as important as job numbers when we look at the emerging economy. So it's important to note that these numbers are great, but really to realize this employment potential, we're going to need 2 things. We're going to need an ongoing investment, and we also need an ongoing implementation of supporting policies and commitment to actually seeing these policies go through. So what could you do on a local level? The first thing would be to support clean energy opportunities in your municipalities. And this can happen on 3 fronts. The first is transportation. So looking at how can we decarbonize freight and freight deliveries, supporting pretty much electric vehicle charger bylaw and electrifying municipal fleets. The second front would be on electricity, supporting municipal-owned renewable energy projects and municipal solar rebates, LED street light retrofits, for example. And the third one would be under buildings. How can we develop net zero strategies over the next coming years? And how can we incentivize deep energy retrofits in buildings that go beyond just lighting retrofits? So things like insulation, maybe geothermal installation. The second one that I would like to mention would be to ask for better transparency and reporting around job numbers at the provincial, municipal, and federal levels, excuse me. So if we can gather primary data, live data about a specific policy, it really would allow us to identify the role that it plays in job creation and its success. So we've seen, for example, some of the Green Line extensions, the Green Line extension in Calgary and some extensions in Edmonton. In the public, in the news release, essentially, they mentioned that this is going to create X amount of jobs. And that allows you to really understand the impact of transit development on green job creation. And finally, it's important to connect green jobs to creation to climate action and energy transition narratives, or simply we just call this marketing. So instead of imagining that an Albertan worker is a person in blue coveralls and a hard hat working in oil and gas, that could equally be an Albertan in a harness and a hard hat installing a solar panel on a rooftop. So it's important to try to connect these narratives as well to green jobs in a way that showcases that this transition is really happening all around us. And so with that, I touched on a lot of elements on a very high level. If you would like to continue the conversation, please reach out to me at these coordinates. And thank you very much for tuning in.
Thank you, Saeed and Patrick. Now we will have 10 to 15 minutes of questions. So we have one from Kevin here, who asks, how do trade agreements and the jurisprudence followed by quasi-judicial governing bodies like the World Trade Organization interfere with sustainability, transition procurement, and regulatory options available to various levels of government in Canada? And what can be done in the short and medium term to bust those barriers?
Maybe I can begin. You know, you're right. We have this bone, you know, with those trade agreements, which are quite inconvenient, but it's also financial choices that we do. You know, if we did delocalize all our industries and plants in other countries, it's financial reasons. It's not because we couldn't keep them in Canada. We chose to delocalize those industries and those plants. So the contrary is quite possible, you know, and we have everything to absolutely in this situation, in this opportunity to rethink our industrial, structures to maybe do some more sustainable industries and more sustainable plants. So we have this choice, and we still have it, and I think that's one of the solution. And there are other ones. We have tools, we have levers that we can use. Like I was saying, there's public procurement laws. So we also have the choice to choose what we buy, you know, and we can pass bills on this, and we have to do this, especially in larger cities like Vancouver, Ottawa, Montreal, Toronto. And if COVID taught us something, is that we can be much more resilient that we thought, and we have to do, because we can not be dependent on food, on, you know, basic stuff like food, drugs, and all that kind of stuff. We have to produce ourselves our basic needs. So we have solutions, I think, in there, and we have to. There's nothing that can not allow us to put a carbon tariff barrier for Canada for the stuff that we import. So I think all of those solutions must be explored.
Saeed, do you want to add something?
I would just like to add from a provincial perspective, some of the stuff we've seen from Alberta is that whenever a carbon pricing or pollution pricing regulation comes into place, the industries that are mainly what we call emission intensive or trade exposed industries are the ones that get a little bit of exemptions. So if the price of let's say drilling a well is going to be too expensive in Alberta, and we're going to lose these jobs. What we see then is these jobs the companies are going to transition to places where it's more economical to do so. So I think two things are going to be really important is that under our transition plan, we have to really find a way to really create jobs in alternative, cleaner industries, and at the same time, looking at diversifying our economy so that job creation isn't specifically tied to a trade exposed industry, and there is actually job creation mechanisms throughout the whole economy. So I just wanted to add that specifically.
Great, thank you. And I guess this is just a more general one. Saeed, you touched upon this slightly at the end of their presentation, but so how do we ensure that people actually want to transition, making it easy and desirable for the majority to do so instead of having them resist to it?
Patrick touched on this a little bit also in his presentation, and generally everybody wants to make the world a better place. Nobody, unless they're really cynical, and they, so the issue with the energy transition is that, at least from what I've seen, is that a big part of the resistance comes from the perception that it presents a threat to your livelihood. So if you feel like this transition is going to make me lose my job and lose my bills or not be able to pay my bills, it becomes as a threat perception, and that's where the resistance comes from. And I think really to make the transition easy, we need to put three things in place. The first one is that we need to make sure that there are job opportunities that exist out there as alternatives. We need to make sure that we have a very well-designed just transition program that considers people in different stages of their careers. When we talk about skills retraining, it's easy to imagine that for a person out of school who's in their 20s or 30s, but it's a lot tough for a person who's 55 years old, 5 years away from retirement, to tell them, look, you need to go back to school and become a wind power technician. So really designing a just transition program that takes into account these nuances is very important. And then third of all, as I mentioned before, we need to do better marketing we need to communicate effectively and use inclusive, non-threatening language when we talk about the energy transition. So if we say things such as clean economy, we need to recognize that we're not in a way insinuating that fossil fuels are necessarily dirty or that your job is dirty, because there's still clean opportunities within there, such as carbon capture or innovative technologies that reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
And Patrick, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, but like I said, you have to mobilize workers towards the solution. You have to make them on board, And one of the basic error that we do, even with the best intention, and we can see that on kind of left-wing parties, is that we're trying so hard to find the best solutions for the workers without asking them. So we're just entering the workplaces saying, oh, we have a solution for you, and they're like, no. it's like that. So and just transition, we much too often take this as, what, just transition is all about how we're going to mitigate the effects of the job losses. But if you go see a worker saying, don't worry, we're going to mitigate how you're going to lose your job, they're going to look you right in the eye and say, I don't want you to tell me how I will better lose my job. I want you to help me keep my job. So we have to make them on board and put kind of the burden on their shoulders for the solution. If there are no solution at the end of the day, they will by themselves saying, okay, we tried everything. So they will less resist in their capacity. And there's something which is quite amusing. I was with a cement union rep a couple of months ago, and saying to me that, what, now we're talking about on a government level to sending consultants, engineers in my plant to tell us how we could decarbonize the workplace. But the solution that those people, which cost a lot, brought to the employers is something that we're telling the boss for 10 years, the same thing. So they don't listen to us. They spent a lot of money on engineers and consultants that's saying the same thing that we already know. And the changes did not took place because the employer saying I don't have any money for that kind. So you see, it's kind of a vicious circle, and we have to put them in the solution, recognize that they have some kind of expertise in what they're doing, and then they will be less resistant and going towards the change that we want.
Great, thank you. And kind of similarly to that, we had a question from Liz Couture earlier, and she asked, what are the ways in which currently we are demonizing the jobs in the oil and gas industry?
It's not just oil and gas, it's in industries, I think, that emitting a high level of GHG, and that's something that I heard a lot in the last couple of years, is that um, those workers are responsible for the situation. Those workers are responsible for the climate crisis, and that they have to be punished quite clearly like that, And I have one example quite clear in Gaspésie, which is one of the Quebec regions. We have a cement factory, which is called Pardaniel, in Pardaniel, which is called Mécanis. And we have a lot of citizens asking for the shutdown of the plant, even though if we shut down this plant, we will plunge the community in a terrible social and economic crisis, because it's the only industry in the area. Of course, when this industry has been constructed, it costs, I think, 200 million, something like that the government sent for the construction of this plant. We could have used this money to have a lot of projects and diversify the economy. I think that's the way that we have to do this. But well, it's been constructed, and those workers don't work there to destroy climate. They work there to have wages, and support their communities. So, but we add those kind of talk that they should be punished. The plants should be closed down, and government should compensate the communities, but not the workers. Not 1 cent to the workers as a punishment, but give all the money to communities. So that's the kind of talk that I heard about all the time, And when you're going on oil and gas sector, it's quite c'est pire, It's
It's worse.
it's like, yeah, it's worse. It's like I won't cry for those workers, but it's not the workers the problem. It's the sectors in the finance, And if you look at the just recovery principles that we launched with hundreds of other groups, we're asking help for the workers, not these sectors, not the industries. And there's a difference between those two. And we must not demonize those people, because if we do so, they are going to resist. They're going to say, oh, well, I'm trying to do my best, but all I'm saying is I gotta be punished. I'm bad. So that's what I was talking about by demonizing.
Thank you. And Saeed, would you like to add anything to this conversation?
Yeah, I'd just like to add that it's definitely a difficult conversation to have, because in Alberta, for example, we're facing very severe recession because of COVID right now, and people are worried about jobs. People are worried about maintaining jobs and even like creating jobs and supporting economies. And a big part of our economy, unfortunately, is the oil and gas sector. So the government is doing in a way what they do best, but just like Patrick mentioned, if we in a way are able to differentiate about the needs of the workers rather than the needs of the corporations, and realizing that the corporations that have been present in this industry, generating billions of dollars from this industry, also has a responsibility towards these workers, I think that's just as important. And one thing that I've been noticing specifically in COVID, and I'm sure applies to other recessions, is that a company is able to withstand a recession over a year, and they're still going to be around 5 years from now. But when it comes down to the individual, it's a lot difficult to tell them, hey, you know what, just wait, in 5 years, the economy is going to bounce back, because you have mortgage payments, you have bill payments that are on the monthly. So trying to be able to reconcile that in a way that that narrative will also give us a better understanding about the relationships between workers and the industry as well.
Great, thank you. So we have time for one final question. Here we have, what would be your 3 top pieces of advice for professionals who are training future green job seekers?
Starting, so I would say the first one would be that the success of sustainability in general really depends on breaking down silos across sectors and identifying some of the synergies that are available there and how we can work together. So how can electricity and the energy industry work with the cement and steel industry to find a solution there, a low carbon solution or low carbon alternatives. So I would say encourage them first of all to embrace that diversity and build a diverse skill set accordingly that creates professionals that can work across these sectors. The second one would be that technology is rapidly evolving, and it's really important to stay on top of essentially the evolution of the technology and also the evolution of sustainability best practices. Solar prices have dropped by 90% since 2010. So, you know, the economic discussion even is changing a lot. And we're recently seeing, while the environment and economics were contradicting ideas, right now they actually do match. We're seeing that renewable energy generation is cost competitive with fossil fuel generation. But the problem comes in the way that our grid is maintained. We need to, so decentralized generation is a lot more supportive to renewable energy than you know, centralized generation like coal-fired generation, for example. And the third thing would be to really build your network, your professional and social network, because the environmental community is, first of all, very small and it is growing. But at the same time, we need to figure out how to collaborate both locally, nationally, as well as globally to solve this issue. As much as, you know, we see a lot of the local local tensions, this is a global issue that we all need to collaborate on. So I do encourage them to build their network, and I think having a united front, not just within the environmental community, but within the industrial sector as well, and finding a role for the environmental community in there is going to be really important for us to meet our climate targets by 2050.
Yeah, I fully agree with Saeed that intersectionality is the key word, you know, and social dialogue. You have to have a lot of stakeholders around the table to take those decisions and have the best diagnosis possible to do these changes, because the amount of money that you're going to put in this transition must be on a structural level. You have to change something when you're doing this decision, and you have to have those actors around the table, because you're missing some pieces. Everybody has a pieces of the solution. So we have to put the puzzle together. So I think I fully agree with Saeed.
Great, so that was our final question. Thank you, Patrick and Saeed. Thank you for your wonderful presentations. And thank you everyone who tuned in today. We're very happy you were all able to make it. Be on the lookout for more Branch and Learn webinars. We host them every few weeks. You can find many different types of webinars, past and upcoming, in our HubFlix gallery, which you can find at hubflix.climatehub.ca. So thank you again and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, bye.